The Crystal Spire Academy stood like a mountain of glass and starlight, reaching so high into the sky that clouds gathered around its middle floors. For 3,000 years, this place had shaped the minds of dragon royalty. Every prince, every princess, every future ruler of the great dragon empire had walked these halls and emerged transformed. The Academy's reputation was flawless, unbreakable, legendary across 17 star systems. Until Princess Valeria. The young dragon sat in her tower classroom on the Academy's highest level, perfectly still like a statue carved from midnight stone. Her scales were pure obsidian black, so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Only her eyes showed any color, twin pools of molten gold that stared at nothing and everything at once. She was beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, powerful and untouchable and utterly silent. For 7 long years, the greatest minds in the known galaxy had tried to teach her. They came with credentials that would make anyone's head spin. Professor Mitchell arrived first, a philosopher who had decoded the writing systems of 12 extinct civilizations. He lasted 4 months before admitting defeat. Then came Dr. Rebecca Stone, a telepath so powerful she could share thoughts with creatures who had no concept of language as humans understood it. She resigned after 3 months, tears streaming down her face as she packed her belongings. The parade continued. A mathematician who could calculate orbital mechanics in his head. A historian who had memorized every major event in 10,000 years of galactic history. A linguist who spoke 4 to 7 languages fluently. Even a sentient cloud of luminous gas that communicated through shifts in color and temperature made the attempt. One by one, they all failed. One by one, they all left, their pride intact but their spirits broken. The problem wasn't that Princess Valeria was stupid. Medical scans showed a brain functioning at extraordinary levels. Her eyes tracked movement. She clearly heard everything said to her. She just never responded. Never spoke. Never wrote. Never gestured. She simply sat in her chair, day after day, while tutors tried every technique known to educational science and several that weren't. Emperor Drake and Empress Helena watched their daughter with growing desperation. They were massive creatures, each large enough to wrap around a small building, their scales gleaming with the rich bronze color that marked the royal bloodline. They loved their daughter fiercely, but love couldn't solve this mystery. They consulted doctors who found nothing wrong. They brought in spiritual advisors who detected no curse or magical interference. They even, in a moment of wild hope, hired a comedian thinking maybe Valeria just needed to laugh. That experiment lasted exactly 1 day. Time was running out. In the Dragon Empire, every heir must pass a series of tests by their 13th molting, the time when a young dragon sheds their childhood scales and grows their adult armor. Valeria's 13th molting was now less than a year away. If she couldn't demonstrate basic competency in law, history, mathematics, and governance, she would be passed over for succession. Her younger brother would become heir instead, and Valeria would live out her days as a royal footnote, the princess who could have been. The Academy's hallways buzzed with gossip. Students whispered as they passed the tower. Faculty members shook their heads sadly. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought Valeria was cursed. Others believed she was simply deficient, a genetic fluke in an otherwise perfect bloodline. A few wondered if maybe she was so intelligent that she found everyone else too boring to acknowledge. None of the theories helped. Meanwhile, hundreds of levels below that tower classroom, Tyler Bennett pushed his cleaning cart down a hallway that smelled faintly of ozone and dragon musk. He was human, which made him a rare sight this deep in dragon territory. Humans were considered a curious species, interesting in the way a child's drawing is interesting, cute but not particularly impressive. They lived such short lives, barely 100 years if they were lucky. They had no natural abilities like telepathy or fire breathing. They couldn't even fly without building machines to do it for them. Tyler had worked at the Academy for 2 years now, and he'd grown comfortable with being invisible. Dragons didn't really see janitors, the same way most people don't really see the person who empties the trash in their office. He was part of the background, a moving piece of furniture that occasionally mopped things. He didn't mind. The pay was decent, the work was honest, and he got to live in one of the most magnificent structures in the galaxy. His shift always ended in the tower, cleaning Princess Valeria's classroom after the latest tutor had given up for the day. He'd seen a dozen of them come and go, each one looking more defeated than the last. The classroom itself was beautiful, with windows that showed a view of 3 moons rising over a purple ocean. Expensive educational equipment lined the walls, most of it still in its original packaging because no one had figured out how to get Valeria to use any of it. On this particular evening, Tyler was sweeping under a desk when his broom knocked something loose. A cloth puppet tumbled out, landing on the floor with a soft thump. It was a ridiculous little thing, maybe 10 inches tall, made from cheap fabric with 2 button eyes stitched crookedly onto its face. Some tutor must have tried using it as a teaching aid before abandoning the idea as childish. Tyler picked it up, turning it over in his hands. On impulse, maybe because he was tired, maybe because he was alone and feeling a bit silly, he slipped his hand inside the puppet. It fit perfectly. He made it dance across the nearest desk, bouncing it from corner to corner. "Well, hello there," he said in a high, squeaky voice that made him chuckle at his own foolishness. "I'm Sir Buttonface, bravest knight in all the land, and I'm here to conquer this mountain of desk." He was so busy making the puppet perform an elaborate battle with a pencil holder that he didn't notice the soft sound of breathing change rhythm behind him. He didn't see Princess Valeria's golden eyes shift, tracking the puppet's movement with sudden, intense focus. He didn't realize that for the first time in 7 years, something had broken through the silence. He just cleaned the room, left the puppet on a shelf, and went home, thinking nothing of it. Tyler came back the next evening like always, pushing his cart through the tower's spiraling corridors. He'd almost forgotten about the puppet until he stepped into Princess Valeria's classroom and stopped dead in his tracks. The puppet wasn't on the shelf where he'd left it. Instead, it sat perfectly upright on the main desk in the center of the room, positioned like it was waiting for class to begin. That was strange. The tutors never moved his cleaning supplies around, and the princess, well, everyone said she didn't interact with anything. Tyler walked over slowly, looking at the puppet. It hadn't fallen. Someone had deliberately placed it there, even adjusting its little cloth arms so they rested on the desk like a student ready to learn. A weird feeling crept over him, like being watched, but when he glanced around the empty classroom, he saw nothing but shadows and moonlight streaming through the tall windows. He shrugged, picked up the puppet, and slipped it back onto his hand. Maybe one of the cleaning staff had moved it as a joke. As he mopped the floor, he found himself talking to the puppet again, giving it that same silly voice. "Sir Buttonface returns. Today we must battle the fearsome dust bunny dragon lurking beneath the chair." He made the puppet dive under a desk, then emerged victorious with a clump of dust stuck to its head like a trophy. It was stupid, childish even, but it made the boring work more fun. When he finished cleaning, he decided to try something. Instead of putting the puppet away, he left it arranged in a little scene. He propped it up against a book, positioned like it was reading, with the pages open to a chapter about ancient dragon history. Then he went home, wondering if he'd lost his mind. The next morning, before his shift technically started, Tyler made an excuse to pass by the tower classroom. He peeked through the small window in the door. The puppet had moved again. Now it sat on a different desk entirely, and the book had been turned to a new page. Not just any page, either. Someone had marked a specific passage about dragon communication methods with a scrap of paper. Tyler's heart started beating faster. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was interacting with his puppet shows. And given that only one person spent time in this room, it had to be her. Princess Valeria. The girl everyone said didn't respond to anything was playing along with the janitor's silly puppet game. He started coming to the classroom earlier each evening, making his scenes more elaborate. One night, the puppet was attempting to practice magic spells, with Tyler providing sound effects as invisible spells misfired and turned things the wrong colors. Another night, Sir Buttonface tried to fly by jumping off desks, failing spectacularly every time, until Tyler narrated how the little knight learned that some creatures aren't meant to fly, and that's perfectly fine. The responses grew more complex. He'd find drawings left on desks, crude sketches done with claw marks on scrap paper. One showed the puppet riding on the back of a small dragon. Another depicted the puppet falling off a desk with motion lines showing the tumble. Someone was watching his performances. Someone was continuing the stories after he left. 3 weeks into this strange game, Tyler decided to take a big risk. He spent his day off sewing a second puppet from an old cleaning cloth and spare buttons from his apartment. This one was meant to be a dragon, tiny and blue with wings made from torn fabric. It looked almost as ridiculous as Sir Buttonface, but that was the point. That evening, he set up both puppets in the classroom. He made them talk to each other, except the dragon puppet couldn't speak words. Instead, Tyler had the dragon puppet communicate through movements and expressions while Sir Buttonface narrated what his friend was feeling. "Oh, you're scared of the big test tomorrow? That's okay. Everyone gets scared. What matters is showing up and trying, even when it's hard. Even when everyone's watching. Even when you think you might fail." He performed the whole show for the empty room, putting more effort into it than he'd put into anything in months. The dragon puppet wanted to express herself but couldn't find the right way. The night puppets stayed patient, finding different methods until they could understand each other. When Tyler finished, he carefully placed both puppets on the main desk and started packing up his cleaning supplies. That's when he heard it. The softest sound, like wind through leaves, except there was no wind in the sealed classroom. He turned around slowly, his breath catching in his throat. Princess Valeria stood 5 feet away from him. Not hiding in shadows, not pressed against the far wall like the tutors had described, but right there, fully visible in the moonlight. She was smaller than he'd expected, probably only twice his size, which was tiny for a dragon. Her obsidian scales caught the light in strange ways, making her look like she was carved from starry night sky. They stared at each other for a long moment. Tyler's mind went blank. He should probably bow or apologize or run away or something, but he couldn't move. The princess was even more beautiful up close, and her golden eyes held an intelligence that made him feel like he was the one being studied. Then, slowly, deliberately, Princess Valeria raised one claw. Her movements were careful, precise, like each gesture cost her something. She pointed at the dragon puppet on the desk. Then she pointed at herself. Understanding hit Tyler like lightning. She wasn't broken. She wasn't stupid or cursed or deficient. She just couldn't translate her thoughts into the forms everyone demanded from her. Direct questions paralyzed her. Eye contact overwhelmed her. The weight of expectations crushed her into silence. But this silly puppet game? It created distance. Safety. A way to express things without the unbearable pressure of being herself. Princess Valeria, future empress, disappointment of the empire. Tyler's hands were shaking as he picked up the dragon puppet. He walked forward carefully, like approaching a wild animal, and held it out to her. "Would you like to show me?" he asked quietly. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Princess Valeria reached out and took the puppet. Her massive claw handled it with surprising gentleness, slipping it on like Tyler had done. She held it up, examining it, and then something incredible happened. The puppet moved. Not random movements, but purposeful gestures. The little cloth dragon bowed to Sir Buttonface. Then it performed a series of movements that told a story, Tyler realized, watching in awe. A story about a dragon who lived in a tall tower and couldn't find her voice but wanted desperately to speak. A story about loneliness and frustration and hope. Tyler grabbed Sir Buttonface and joined in. The two puppets had a conversation without words from the princess's mouth, but full of meaning and emotion and intelligence. They played together until the 3 moons set and dawn started breaking over the purple ocean outside the windows. When they finally stopped, exhausted, Princess Valeria carefully placed her puppet next to his on the desk. She didn't speak. But she didn't need to. Tyler understood perfectly. They just found a language that worked. News traveled fast in the Crystal Spire Academy, especially news this bizarre. Within 3 days, everyone knew that Princess Valeria was having daily sessions with Tyler Bennett, the human janitor. And everyone had opinions about it. The Council of Pedagogues called an emergency meeting in their chamber, a circular room with walls carved from a single massive crystal that amplified voices to booming levels. There were 5 of them, ancient dragons whose scales had faded to silver with age, whose knowledge supposedly exceeded that of entire libraries. Elder Northam, the oldest at nearly 2,000 years, slammed his tail against the floor so hard the whole tower shook. "A janitor," he hissed, smoke curling from his nostrils. "A human janitor who cleans floors is teaching the heir to our empire. With toys. Children's toys." The way he said the word toys made it sound like something obscene. Elder Whitmore, the only female on the council, nodded sharply. "It's an insult to our profession. We've trained emperors and empresses for 3,000 years. We've shaped the minds that govern 17 star systems. And now they want us to believe this human with his little cloth puppets has succeeded where we failed." The other council members murmured agreement, their voices creating a low rumble like distant thunder. They weren't just offended. They were threatened. If a janitor could teach the princess, what did that say about their fancy degrees and centuries of experience? What did it say about the entire educational system they'd built? Elder Northam stood up, his full height making the ceiling seem suddenly low. "I'm calling for his immediate termination. Today. Right now. This mockery ends before it damages the princess further and makes us all look like fools." But there was a problem. Emperor Drake and Empress Helena had already heard about the puppet sessions. More importantly, they'd heard that Valeria was responding, actually engaging with learning for the first time in 7 years. That same afternoon, they summoned the council to the throne room. The throne room made even the council chamber look small. It could fit 1,000 dragons comfortably, with walls of polished obsidian that reflected everything in dark, distorted ways. The Emperor and Empress sat on thrones carved from meteorite iron, their bronze scales gleaming under lights that floated without any visible support. "You want to fire the human," Emperor Drake said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in Tyler's chest, watching from the back of the room where he'd been told to stand. "Your Majesty, with all respect, this situation is completely inappropriate," Elder Northam began. "The education of a royal heir is a sacred tradition. Methods matter. Dignity matters. We cannot have the future Empress learning from puppet shows like some common hatchling." Empress Helena leaned forward, her golden eyes narrowing. "And yet for 7 years, your traditional methods produced nothing. Absolutely nothing. My daughter sat in silence while your greatest minds failed one after another. Now this human has her engaged, learning, communicating through his puppets. So tell me, Elder, why should we stop the only thing that's actually working?" The council members shifted uncomfortably. Elder Whitmore spoke up, her voice trying to sound reasonable. "Your Majesties, we don't know what is actually teaching her. There's no curriculum, no testing, no standards. He's making it up as he goes. How do we know she's learning anything of value?" "Give us 1 month," Emperor Drake said suddenly. Every head in the room turned toward him. 1 month for Tyler Bennett to continue his methods. If Princess Valeria shows measurable progress, he stays. If not, we return to your traditional approach. Fair? The council couldn't refuse a direct imperial command, but Elder Northam's face showed exactly what he thought of fairness. "As you wish, Your Majesty. 1 month." That's when things got ugly. The council couldn't fire Tyler, but they could make his life miserable. And they did, with the kind of petty cruelty that only educated people can truly master. First, they removed all the supplies from Valeria's classroom. The puppets Tyler had been building disappeared overnight. The fabrics, buttons, and sewing materials he'd started keeping there vanished. When he tried to requisition more, his requests were denied for budget reasons, even though the Academy spent more on a single day's worth of fancy dinners than Tyler's supplies would cost for a year. Then came the rumors. Tyler would hear tutors whispering as he passed, loud enough for him to catch words like charlatan and false hope and taking advantage. Some suggested he was mentally manipulating the princess somehow. Others implied darker motivations, though they never said exactly what they meant, just let the insinuation hang in the air like poison. His work schedule suddenly became impossible. He'd be assigned to clean the East Wing, then get a message that he was needed urgently in the West Wing, then another message sending him back to the East. Someone kept scheduling him for shifts that overlapped with his evening sessions with Valeria. When he showed up late, he'd get written up for poor time management. Other janitors started avoiding him. Not because they disliked him, but because associating with Tyler seemed to make their own lives harder. Their supplies would go missing. Their schedules would get shuffled. The message was clear: supporting the human janitor was bad for your career. Even students got in on it. Young dragons would accidentally knock over his cleaning supplies in hallways, then laugh as he scrambled to pick up scattered mops and brushes. Once, someone replaced his floor cleaner with something that left a sticky residue, making every surface he touched worse instead of better. He got blamed for that, naturally. But Tyler didn't argue or defend himself. He couldn't afford to. Instead, he adapted. He bought puppet materials with his own money from shops in the city below the academy. He stayed up late after his impossible shifts to prepare lessons. When the classroom was locked, he taught Valeria in supply closets and empty hallways, anywhere they could find privacy. And the lessons were working. Through the puppets, Valeria was learning faster than anyone expected. Tyler would create puppet shows about mathematics, with characters who had to solve problems to advance the story. For navigation, the puppets became space explorers plotting courses through dangerous asteroid fields. History became elaborate theatrical performances where Valeria could pause, rewind, ask questions through her puppet without the crushing pressure of being directly questioned. The princess still never spoke aloud, not a single word. But her puppets talked constantly, each one with a distinct voice and personality that she created. Through them, she was confident, curious, even funny. Tyler realized she wasn't deficient in any way. She experienced reality with an intensity others didn't understand. Every social interaction felt overwhelming. Every direct question became a crushing weight of expectation. The puppets gave her room to breathe, to think, to be brilliant without drowning in her own awareness. 3 weeks into the month, Tyler walked into an ambush. The council had assembled in Valeria's classroom with Emperor Drake and Empress Helena, demanding a progress demonstration. No preparation. No warning. Just prove right now that any real learning was happening. Tyler looked at Princess Valeria, who had frozen in place, her puppet slipping from her claw. The pressure of all those eyes, all those expectations, was already shutting her down. But then Elder Northam played his final card, the one Tyler had known was coming eventually. We demand the princess face the traditional examination. The real one. In front of the full court. Without puppets. Without intermediaries. This charade has gone on long enough. The traditional examination. The brutal oral test that would decide Valeria's entire future. Tyler felt his stomach drop. The day of the traditional examination arrived with 3 moons hanging in the morning sky like watching eyes. Tyler hadn't slept in 2 days. His hands were covered in small cuts from sewing needles, and his back ached from hunching over his project in the tiny apartment he could barely afford. But it was finished. It had to be finished, because today would either save Princess Valeria or destroy both of them completely. The Obsidian Hall was the largest room in the entire Crystal Spire Academy, so massive that clouds sometimes formed near its ceiling. Thousands of dragon nobles filled the space, their scales creating a sea of color that shifted and glittered like a living rainbow. The sound of their breathing alone was like standing near a waterfall, a constant rush of air that made Tyler's ears ring. He stood at the entrance, looking impossibly small and human among all these giant creatures. On his back, strapped with improvised harnesses, was the portable puppet theater he'd built. It was nearly as tall as he was, made from scavenged wood and painted curtains and more hope than engineering skill. It looked fragile and ridiculous, especially here in this hall built from seamless black stone that reflected everything like dark mirrors. The Council of Pedagogues sat on an elevated platform at the far end of the hall, arranged in a semicircle that made them look like judges at a trial. Elder Northam sat in the center, and even from this distance, Tyler could see the satisfaction in his ancient eyes. The old dragon thought he'd won. He expected Valeria to fail today, expected this entire puppet experiment to collapse under the weight of real scrutiny. Emperor Drake and Empress Helena occupied thrones carved from meteorite iron, positioned higher than even the council. Their faces were carefully neutral, showing nothing, but their tails twitched with nervous energy that betrayed their true feelings. They were terrified for their daughter. Princess Valeria was supposed to appear and take her place at the examination platform in the center of the hall. That's how it always worked. The heir would stand alone under the eyes of thousands, answering questions about law, history, governance, philosophy, everything an emperor or empress needed to know. It was brutal by design, meant to prove the heir could handle pressure. But Valeria didn't appear. Instead, Tyler Bennett walked onto the examination floor alone, that ridiculous theater on his back, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Every eye in the hall turned toward him. The temperature seemed to drop as thousands of dragons focused their attention on this one small human who was breaking every rule and tradition they held sacred. Guards moved forward to remove him. Elder Northam rose from his seat, smoke pouring from his nostrils. Seize that human. This is a sacred ceremony, not a circus. But Emperor Drake raised one massive claw, and everything stopped. The guards froze mid-step. Elder Northam's protest died in his throat. Into the silence, the Emperor spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive hall. Speak, human. My daughter chose you as her teacher. Let's see what you've taught her. Tyler's legs were shaking so badly he could barely walk, but he made it to the center platform. He carefully lowered the theater from his back and began setting it up. His hands fumbled with the supports. One curtain got stuck. In the deadly quiet of the hall, every mistake felt magnified 1,000 times. He could hear dragons whispering, their voices creating a low murmur of disbelief and mockery. Finally, the theater stood ready, its painted curtains showing scenes of stars and castles and dragons in flight. Tyler took a deep breath and stepped behind it. He pulled out the first puppet, a small dragon with obsidian scales and golden button eyes, and let it peek over the edge of the stage. Your Majesties, honored council, noble dragons of the Empire, Tyler said, his voice barely steady. I present Princess Valeria's traditional examination, performed in the manner she has chosen to communicate. Then the real show began, and it was nothing like anyone expected. More puppets emerged from behind the curtain, each one distinct and carefully crafted. Some represented famous historical dragons. Others represented abstract concepts like justice and mercy. There was even a tiny puppet council that looked suspiciously like the Real Council of Pedagogues, which made several dragons in the audience chuckle despite themselves. Through these puppets, Princess Valeria began her examination. But she wasn't just answering questions. She was creating arguments, debates, entire philosophical discussions. A puppet representing an ancient emperor discussed his decision to expand the empire through conquest, while another puppet challenged his reasoning, presenting the costs in lives and resources. Valeria didn't just know history. She understood it, questioned it, analyzed it from multiple angles. For the mathematics portion, puppets acted out complex scenarios involving resource distribution, orbital calculations for space travel, economic theories about trade between star systems. The puppets made mistakes on purpose, then corrected themselves, showing the thought process behind the solutions. Elder Whitmore tried to interrupt. "This is absurd. We're supposed to question her directly, not watch a puppet show." But something strange was happening in the audience. Other dragons were leaning forward, engaging with the performance. Someone shouted a question about a legal precedent, and a puppet representing Valeria turned to address them, explaining the precedent and then discussing 3 different interpretations that scholars had debated for centuries. Another dragon asked about economic policy, and the puppets launched into a discussion about the balance between growth and stability. The examination had transformed into something alive, interactive, brilliant. Tyler could see Valeria behind the theater, her claws moving the puppets with increasing confidence. She wasn't hiding. She was performing, sharing her mind in the only way she could manage without being crushed by the pressure. An hour passed, then 2. The audience forgot they were supposed to be judging. They were learning, being challenged to think differently, seeing their own history and laws through fresh eyes. Even some of the council members looked thoughtful, forgetting their prejudice in the face of genuine intellectual engagement. But then Elder Northam stood up, and his voice cut through everything like a knife. "Enough. This is mockery dressed up as education. I invoke the right of direct challenge." The hall went dead silent. The right of direct challenge was ancient law, absolute and unbreakable. It required the heir to answer one question face-to-face with no intermediaries. No puppets. No help. Just the heir and the questioner. Refusal meant automatic disqualification from succession. Tyler felt his blood turn to ice. Elder Northam's smile was cruel as he looked past the theater to where Princess Valeria crouched behind it. "Step forward, Princess. Let everyone see you. And answer me this, directly, with your own voice and no tricks. Why should you rule this empire?" It was the perfect trap. The question demanded personal vulnerability, required direct confrontation, everything that paralyzed Valeria. Tyler couldn't answer for her. The puppets couldn't shield her. This was the moment Elder Northam had been waiting for, the moment he'd prove that all of this had been a waste of time. Tyler stepped out from behind the theater and looked at Valeria. Her golden eyes were wide with panic. Her claws had frozen on the puppets. He could see her starting to shut down, retreating into that unreachable silence. The silence in the obsidian hall stretched so long it became painful. Thousands of dragons held their breath, watching the puppet theater where Princess Valeria remained hidden. Elder Northam stood on his platform looking triumphant, certain he'd finally exposed the princess as unfit to rule. Tyler felt his heart hammering so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Then Princess Valeria moved. She didn't hide or retreat. Instead, she stepped out from behind the theater, fully visible to every single dragon in the massive hall. Tyler had never seen her look so small. Her obsidian scales seemed to dim under all those staring eyes, and her claws trembled slightly as she walked. But she kept moving, one slow step at a time, toward Elder Northam's platform. The old dragon leaned forward, his ancient face showing satisfaction. "Well, Princess? We're waiting. Tell us why you should rule." Valeria stopped in the center of the examination floor. She didn't speak. The silence grew heavier, more unbearable. Tyler could see nobles starting to shift uncomfortably. Some looked away, unable to watch what felt like a public execution. Empress Helena had one claw pressed to her chest, looking like she might be sick. Then Valeria did something completely unexpected. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out the very first puppet Tyler had ever made, that ridiculous cloth knight with crooked button eyes. Sir Button Face, the silly thing that had started everything. She held it carefully in one massive claw, then walked forward and placed it on the floor directly between herself and Elder Northam. The old dragon looked confused. "What is this? More games? I asked you a direct question, Princess." But Valeria pulled out a tablet from her pouch, a flat piece of technology that humans had introduced to dragon society decades ago. Most dragons considered them beneath their dignity, preferring verbal communication. Valeria's claws moved across its surface, and suddenly her words appeared on floating screens throughout the hall, visible to everyone. This puppet taught me that strength comes in forms you don't expect. The words hung in the air, glowing softly. Valeria continued typing, and more text appeared. For 7 years, you sent me the greatest minds in the Empire. Philosophers who decoded lost languages. Telepaths who could share thoughts with alien species. Mathematicians, historians, scholars of every kind. They all tried to make me learn the way you learn. Speak the way you speak. Think the way you think. Be like you. Tyler watched Elder Northam's face start to change, the satisfaction fading into something else. They failed, Valeria's text continued, not because I'm broken or stupid or cursed. They failed because they saw my silence as emptiness instead of difference. They looked at me and saw what was missing rather than what was there. Every one of them tried to fix me instead of understanding me. Some dragons in the audience nodded slowly. Others whispered to each other, and Tyler caught fragments of their conversations. Several were talking about their own children who struggled in traditional schools, who learned differently, who'd been called difficult or slow. Then a human janitor succeeded where you all failed, Valeria typed. Not because he's smarter than you. Not because he has better training or more knowledge. He succeeded because he saw my silence as a language waiting to be translated instead of a problem to be solved. He didn't try to change me. He found a way to meet me where I was. Elder Northam tried to interrupt. This doesn't answer the question, Princess. Why should you rule? Give us a real answer, not this philosophical deflection. Valeria's claws moved faster across the tablet, and her words appeared more quickly now, gaining momentum and force. You want to know why I should rule? Because I understand something you've forgotten. An empire that only values one way of being, one way of thinking, one way of communicating will miss the brilliance hiding in different minds. How many geniuses have you overlooked because they couldn't perform in your examinations? How many problems remain unsolved because you only listen to voices that sound like yours? The hall had gone completely still. Even the constant rush of dragon breathing seemed quieter. Valeria picked up the cloth night puppet and held it up for everyone to see. I know what it feels like to be dismissed. To be written off as a failure before anyone tried to understand. To have everyone assume the worst because you don't fit their expectations. And I promise you, on my honor as heir to this empire, that no one under my rule will ever feel that way. Not dragons who learn differently. Not humans who get treated like they're less than. Not anyone. Empress Helena was crying openly now, tears running down her bronze scales. Emperor Drake sat forward on his throne, looking at his daughter like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. True leadership, Valeria continued typing, isn't about commanding loudly or fitting perfectly into tradition. It's about creating space for every kind of mind to contribute. It's about recognizing that strength comes in countless forms, and wisdom doesn't always speak with a loud voice. She turned away from Elder Northam and faced her parents directly. Her next words appeared on the screens, and Tyler could hear the courage it took to write them. I am not broken. I am not less than. I am simply myself, completely and truly. And if that disqualifies me from succession, then perhaps this empire needs to examine what it truly values and whether those values still serve us. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then Empress Helena began to laugh, a sound like distant thunder rolling across mountains. It wasn't mockery. It was joy, pride, relief all mixed together. She stood up from her throne, and her voice carried through the entire hall. 37 generations of our family have ruled by speaking loudly and commanding absolutely. By fitting perfectly into tradition and never questioning the old ways. Perhaps it's time for something different. Perhaps the 38th generation should rule by listening deeply and understanding profoundly. Emperor Drake rose as well, his massive form making the thrones look small. The council will record this as a successful examination. More than successful. Exemplary. He turned to look at Tyler, who felt like he might faint from the attention. Tyler Bennett, you are hereby appointed Royal Interpreter and elevated to Chief Educational Innovator. You'll work with the Academy to develop new teaching methods for students who learn differently. Then the Emperor's gaze swept across the Council of Pedagogues. And the Council will assist in this endeavor. Consider it mandatory continuing education. You have much to learn about how learning actually works. Elder Northam looked like he wanted to argue, his mouth opening and closing. But Elder Whitmore surprised everyone by speaking first. Your Majesty is wise. Perhaps we have become too rigid in our methods. She looked at Princess Valeria with something like respect. The princess has shown us that different doesn't mean deficient. That's a lesson worth learning. The other council members nodded, some more reluctantly than others. They were intelligent enough to recognize when they'd been outmaneuvered, and wise enough to adapt rather than fight a losing battle. As the formal ceremony ended and dragons began filing out of the hall, many stopped to speak with Valeria. To Tyler's amazement, several asked questions about her puppet teaching methods. A few mentioned their own children who struggled in traditional schools. The conversation was changing, right there in front of him. Later, after the crowds had dispersed, Tyler and Valeria stood alone with the puppet theater between them. She pulled out a new puppet she'd made, and Tyler grinned when he saw it. The puppet was clearly meant to be him, complete with a tiny mop as a staff and a crooked smile stitched onto its face. Her tablet glowed with new words. "Thank you for teaching the Empire that the smallest, most overlooked people sometimes carry the greatest wisdom." Tyler felt his eyes getting wet, but he blinked the tears away. "Same to you, Princess. You just taught an empire that's thousands of years old how to see differently. That's pretty incredible." Valeria made a sound, not quite a laugh but something close to it. It was rough and unpracticed, like she'd never made that sound before in her life. But it was there, real and genuine. "So," Tyler said, picking up Sir Button Face, "what do we work on tomorrow?" "I'm thinking maybe interpretive dance with puppets? Really shake things up." The princess's puppet performance was her answer, a series of movements that clearly showed what she thought of that idea, making Tyler laugh so hard he had to sit down. In the years that followed, Princess Valeria's approaches to governance became legendary throughout the Empire. She revolutionized how dragons communicated with other species, developing systems that accommodated different ways of thinking and expressing ideas. Tyler's former cleaning closet became the Empire's most innovative educational research center. Students who'd been considered unteachable suddenly thrived under new methods. And the story spread across 17 star systems. Sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that refuses to shout, and sometimes the greatest teacher is the one humble enough to listen.